Well, welcome everyone. It's nice to have everyone back for our last session of the day. It's my pleasure to introduce the title of the session and our speakers. The title is the Montana BIPOC LGBT Solidarity Community Awareness. Our speakers are Ivan McDonald. Ivan is an enrolled member of the Blackfeet tribe. He received his MSW from the University of Montana, and since then has dedicated his career to racial and gender-based justice. Currently, he works as the community engagement lead for the Montana Racial Equity Project with his sister Ivy. With his sister Ivy, he's the most recent recipient of the ACLU of Montana's Jeanette Rankin Peace Award for 2020 for their work on raising awareness for the missing and murdered indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit crisis. Jerico Cummings is an enrolled member of the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe. He's an AmeriCorps VISTA with the Montana Racial Equity Project. He graduated last year from Montana State University, where he served as a Sustained Dialogue Program Coordinator, a Queer Straight Alliance VP, and the ASMSU Student Director of Diversity and Inclusion. That's the student government, the Student Senate. And you can read more about Ivan and Jerico on our website. Jerico, thanks so much for joining us. And I think Ivan is on his way, correct? So you'll be taking the lead here at the beginning. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Paul. Like it was expressed, Ivan is going to be joining us a little late today. So I'm just going to kick things off with all of y'all and kind of bear with me. It's been a long day. I did another presentation yesterday and I'm finding out I'm not as technologically advanced as I thought I was with all these Zoom things and like sharing a screen, that kind of stuff. Okay, so yeah, welcome. Glad y'all are joining us this late in the day. Wow. As Paul mentioned, this session is being recorded. So before we kind of dive into stuff, there are some introductions and like ground rules that I want to cover, or the both of us might cover depending on when Ivan joins us. But I want to start off by introducing myself. My name is Jerico. I use he and they pronouns, and I'm tuning in from Bozeman on the unceded lands of the Crow, Flathead, Salish, Kootenai, Pend Oreille, Cheyenne, many other tribes who once called this area home. My heart work and calling in life is to work with indigenous, queer, LGBTQ, Two-Spirit identifying individuals in the realm of therapy and identity development. And I get to do a bit of that in my role as the AmeriCorps VISTA placed with the Montana Racial Equity Project. And I consider the work that I'm doing right now my heart work. And I say that because two of my most salient aspects of identity intersect and come out in this work. And that's both my identity as an indigenous person, but then also as a like queer, gender non-conforming individual too, who's very much so connected to this specific intersectionality of, or intersection of identity that I think is up and coming and in need of a lot of innovative, creative kind of thinkers, problem solvers, and folks to really create some sort of foundation for the future BIPOC, LGBTQ folks. So if anyone, yeah, I want to refer back to the fact that we're being recorded. So if any of you feel called and comfortable to maybe answer some of these questions, feel free to come off mute or type them in the chat. Feel free to disclose as much or as little as you would like. We just kind of want to create a little space where we get to know each other and I'm also under the impression that this is not just a Montana kind of focused conference and gathering. So folks beyond the border or the confines of the state of Montana, I'd also love to see where folks are tuning in from. I guess I can see the chat, but I don't know if the chat then comes up for me sharing my screen.
I can keep you posted, Jericho, on
Okay.
any chats that come up. We've got someone from Missoula, Montana.
Thanks.
And Tim is saying, I'm Tim Glaza, hopefully I pronounced that correctly. Pronouns he, him, his. I'm on the land of the Northern Cheyenne and Crow, also known as Billings, Montana. My calling in life is community organizing, having fun and building relationships.
Awesome. I can relate to that as well, Tim. I know Ivan can as well, speaking for him, even though he's not here yet.
Are you able to read any of these?
I am. I just don't know if they come up in my screen share thing.
They don't. We don't see anything that you're doing in the background.
Okay, sweet. Thank you, Danny. And I saw that Ivan just joined us. And Sonia in Bozeman, yes, unceded tribal affiliations. Next team. Right on. Thank you, Sonia. And Liz, the land of the Potawatomi, Chippewa, Ojibwe, Michigan as well. Nice. Oh, Jaya, seeing some different tribal affiliations. So I know you made it back to your destination safely. Glad to have
you. Yes, I did.
We have quite a few MTREP folks on this call, so I might pick on a few folks as some things go on. Ivan, we're just doing some introductions. I already introduced myself. If you want to take it away and introduce yourself as well, yeah.
Awesome. Can everyone hear me? Hi, everyone. My name is Ivan McDonald. I'm an enrolled member of the Blackfeet tribe. If you were here this morning, I did the land acknowledgement, and then I was calling in from Billings, the Apselica traditional homelands. But this evening, I join you from Bozeman, which is the Apselica, Cheyenne, and Salish Kootenai lands. So thank you all for attending our presentation this evening.
Awesome. And I think in the interest of time, we'll just keep things rolling. In this session, Ivan and I both will be drawing on our personal lived experiences and kind of the heart work and calling in life that we both intersect and then also diverge and kind of make us both qualified to talk about the specific Montana BIPOC LGBT community here. And so with that, I want to call specific attention to the fact that we are speaking from personal experience, and I view that anytime someone is speaking from personal experience, they're an expert in their own lived reality. So I hope that no one feels called to challenge us on the things that we're sharing. And oftentimes I speak in I statements when I'm talking about something that specifically has happened to me. I don't want to generalize to a broader kind of community that I may be a part of. So if you decide to come off mute or type in the chat, just keep that in mind. Speak from your own personal experience. Try not to make generalizations because all of us have different lived realities. And by making those generalizations, we kind of do away with the rich color that is that we all bring together into a space like this. Most definitely honor confidentiality. I definitely have been a part of over this past year, virtual gatherings, both super academic and professional, and then the complete opposite end of the spectrum, where I want to share the things that I've learned and how I've been impacted. Oftentimes, these moments and experiences come from very emotional places, and I'm very much so thankful to the folks who decided to open up and share these lived realities with me. So I hope that in this session, whatever may impact you or be shared with you, that you honor confidentiality and leave kind of the names and identifying markers in the space, but take the learning and the lesson outside and disseminate that in a way that cannot necessarily be linked back to the individual in this space. I'm right now in violation of this ground rule, but sharing airtime, I know I like to ramble and that kind of thing, or just like throw like my agreement into the chat, but I ask that all of you attending is the word, attending are just mindful of the airtime you're taking up or the time in the chat that you may be taking up. Some folks may need a little bit more time to think and respond than others. So I just want to create that kind of space for folks. Lastly, just be respectful of everyone's place of understanding, kind of like their current knowledge base. If something's said that is problematic or you view as being insensitive, I hope that we, as the next like 40 minutes go on, can foster some sort of relationship with one another where we feel connected with one another enough to maybe address a statement that was said instead of attack the person for what it is that they said or typed into the chat. So I hope that if y'all are capable, I guess, can just like give me a like thumbs up, whether it's on video or if you know how to do the reactions or anything like that, just moving forward, that these are things we can all agree to for a time together. I'm seeing some of the reactions and some physical thumbs up. Awesome. Thank you, folks. And Ivan, I believe I am turning it over to you for the next slide, explaining our organization. You are muted.
Yeah, as you can tell, Jerico and I are both from the Montana Racial Equity Project. The Montana Racial Equity Project is one of the only Black and Indigenous-led and POC-led organizations in the state. We just have our mission statement right up on here, you know, a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that advocates equity and justice for marginalized, disenfranchised, oppressed peoples in Montana. And one of the things I really wanted to draw attention to is our logo. As you can see, our logo is a pine cone, which is in various shades of brown. But what does a pine cone have to do with racial equity and justice? If you look closely, you can see the scales of the pine cone are all different variations and shades of brown, prominent on a white background. The distinctive shades of brown emphasizes the wide range of complexions non-white people come in. The white background symbolizes the society in which people of color must navigate. The scales of our pine cone are also open. We are calling people in when they are or might be receptive, not calling them out. Furthermore, when the scales of a pine cone are in open position, they are dispersing their seeds. While we are not throwing out literal seeds, we are disseminating seeds of knowledge, essential to understanding the racial inequities in our country today. It is important to note the scales only open when they are under extreme heat or with maturity. Talking, learning, and engaging in conversations about race are not easy. It will be uncomfortable. Yet, if you want to understand how to denudate and dismantle racism, you must become comfortable with the uncomfortable.
Sorry, Ivan, did I advance too soon?
No, that was perfect.
Okay, cool. One last thing too that I want to add is like our organization is going on like 6 years too of existence, and MTREP is in an amazing period of time. I started service back at the end of July, and it was myself, the executive director, and 2 other full-time staff, as well as 2 part-time folks. And we're now like up to, all I know is that there are like 11 folks on our staff call, and it's just like one of the most exciting things. I just wanted to throw that out there. We've really came a long way in the last year, but then also the past 5 years. So in terms of solidarity, we have this amazing quote by Bell Hooks. Let y'all read it at your own pace, but something that I really wanted to draw attention to is in the second sentence, in quote, "We must have a community of interests, shared beliefs, and goals around which to unite to build sisterhood. Support can be occasional, it can be given, and just as easily withdrawn." What I really like about this is that it calls attention to the shared interests and beliefs and goals around which to unite and unify on common causes. But then the other aspect that I think is very crucial and speaks to accountability is that the support doesn't always have to come with every call to action or atrocity that may come up. And I think that with that too, recognizing that the space to also push back from support in various realms can also be very useful in terms of kind of like the folks involved in the movement, or like who feels like the voices and perspectives should be heard the most, as opposed to kind of giving into oppressive systems and just disregarding kind of shared experiences and beliefs and experiences that might not transcend all atrocities or calls to action that may come onto our desk, phone, email, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I have a favorite quote from kind of my idea of solidarity and what it means. This comes from a South Asian activist and writer based in Vancouver, Harsha Walia, and it comes from their article, "Moving Beyond a Politics of Solidarity Towards a Practice of Decolonization," which is centered on the idea of indigenous solidarity. One of the basic principles of indigenous solidarity organizing is the notions of taking leadership. According to this principle, non-natives must be accountable and responsive to the experiences, voices, needs, and political perspectives of Indigenous people themselves. From an anti-oppression perspective, meaningful support for Indigenous struggles cannot be directed by non-natives. Taking leadership means being humble and honoring frontline voices of resistance, as well as offering tangible solidarity as needed and requested. Specifically, this translates to taking initiative for self-education about the specific histories of the lands we reside upon, organizing support with the clear guidance and constant and consent of Indigenous communities or groups, building long-term relationships of accountability and never assuming or taking for granted the personal and political trust that non-natives may earn from Indigenous peoples over time. And I think that kind of translates well, you know, when you kind of have the intersecting identities of LGBT plus, there is those same principles of solidarity and community building that translate to that, as well as understanding the histories, the contexts, anything that sort of provides a broader worldview of when you enter into community and enter into solidarity movements with people.
Yeah, thank you so much for that example and piece too, Ivan. I think that transcends greatly into our examples that both touch on kind of like local solidarity efforts and then ones that go beyond. For me, as an AmeriCorps VISTA, I'm not allowed to participate in things pertaining to the legislative session. So Ivan, maybe you could talk a little bit more about the Free and Fair Coalition than I could. Would you mind doing that really quick?
Yeah, so the Free and Fair Coalition is a group of organizers, nonprofit people, community people, activists around the state, largely focused on LGBT plus issues, gender-based issues, gender-based violence issues, and we currently have been a large opponents of a lot of the anti-trans bills that have been coming down the pipeline. And I feel that in my capacity within that group, I've tried to advocate for the intersecting identities of Two-Spirit, Indigenous, BIPOC people. You know, I think it's important to understand that when you are doing this organizing and solidarity, that with regards to the intersecting identities of BIPOC and LGBT people, that you may be advocating for a specific issue on one hand, but through the lens of that person, that BIPOC person may be advocating through another lens. So, you know, if you're if you're organizing against anti-trans legislation, you have to understand where the BIPOC person may be coming in from, where they're also advocating for that, but then they also have to be aware of racial-based violence, police brutality, housing instability, wage gap. And so there's a lot of these different conflicting issues that come in when you're kind of advocating for those groups. But the Free and Fair Coalition has been doing some great work through this current legislative session in the hopes of, you know, making Montana as a inclusive space and place as it can be.
Awesome. Thank you, Ivan, for that clarification. There's this amazing article in The Guardian that I believe a self-identified Indigenous person went around the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota photographing Two-Spirit identifying individuals. I have a huge connection to this kind of work because my family initiated practicing ceremony and all of that on the Pine Ridge Reservation. And there's a lot of amazing work coming out of the activists that are both living and working down on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. Another example that we all could probably draw back on is the protests that went on throughout the summer months, and I believe like even end of May, early June after the horrific murder of George Floyd. So an amazing example of solidarity that ties into this presentation is the Queer Liberation March for Black Lives Matter. In addition to being against police brutality, this is like a New York City kind of pride-focused group that really wanted to put the Black Lives Matter issues regarding police brutality and BIPOC folks losing their lives far too soon as a result of police brutality in ways that I feel like there hasn't been much solidarity previously. I feel like there's a bit of a disconnect between kind of the white queer and white LGBTQ plus community and then the BIPOC queer and LGBTQ plus community. So to come together across lines of difference in meaningful ways, across shared beliefs and interests is amazing. And they're actually planning another 2021 kind of March for Liberation. So if that seems like something that might be of interest to you, do a quick little Google search of the Reclaim Pride Foundation and it should come up. I just graduated last spring. So I'm kind of like shut off from a lot of maybe more academic focused and kind of just like thick, dense books. So I've become a huge fan of podcasts and specifically like poetry and memoirs. So what I've seen specifically with the Food for Thought podcast, it's a group of multiracial, gay, I believe male identifying individuals who are all writers that like to talk about who they're reading, what they're reading, race, justice, sex. It's a fun thing, maybe for some of you younger audience members who may be here now or tuning in later. I want to preface with some language, so maybe do a little research first before jumping into that. There's the Pride Foundation that there's a local Montana kind of chapter focus thing that I'll kind of jump into and break apart some amazing funding opportunities that MTREP has gotten in the realm of racial identity coupled with LGBTQ plus queer identity. And there's a Montana BIPOC mutual aid group that came out of both the COVID virus pandemic spurring, as well as folks, activists, groups rallying in the March for Black Lives Matter. And then our own organization has these monthly solidarity calls that are usually at the end of every month. So stay tuned for those. Yeah, if you feel like learning more about this, reach out to us or check out the website, the MTREP website. Oops. Cool. All right. And so we've kind of been talking about intersectionality here and there. And I think this is a good like segue into the second half of the presentation. But as you can see, there's this definition that reads, intersectionality is a lens through which you can see where power comes and collides, where it interlocks and intersects. It's not simply that there's a race problem here, a gender problem here, and a class or LGBTQ problem there. Many times that framework erases what happens to people who are subject to all of these things. Just want to take a quick moment to kind of just process this definition and maybe think about what might have been new to you in this definition, or if just the concept of, or the definition of intersectionality and the concept of intersectionality are totally new to you, that's fine. Yeah, just like feel free to throw any thoughts into the chat, and I think we'll kind of keep,
yeah,
sorry,
I think no, I was about to say, I think it's really important too to, acknowledge, where the foundations of intersectionality came from, which was Black feminist thought, and particularly Kimberly Crenshaw, through her own experiences as an LGBT person, as well as a Black woman. So, that those sort of foundations, and, I think that people kind of misconstrue intersectionality as kind of this new wave thing when, she originally coined the term in the 80s. So, intersectionality has kind of been a school of thoughts and liberation movements and solidarity movements since that time.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Ivan. And hearing that as well just makes me think in terms of this definition. It touches on power, where we see it coming and colliding, where it interlocks and intersects, or maybe the lack thereof. So when I think of Kimberly Crenshaw's original like intent of coining this term, as well as with the other folks that she was thinking with, is that there was a specific call to attention of the ways in which power, privilege, and oppression operate in these intersecting identities, not only just at the intersections, but then also how they operate individualistically and then are further complicated at the intersections. And Ivan, would you mind kind of sharing a little bit more about your intersecting identities and experience here in Montana?
Yeah, I think that's really important to note. I think even just within regards to my lived experience, but also my work with MTREP, where MTREP is very, very aware of most of the people employed through MTREP are LGBTQIA plus, but of course, are also BIPOC. And yeah, I think it's very aware of kind of those intersections and how they have kind of created the foundation for identity. So, I was someone who grew up on the Blackfeet Reservation, grew up very immersed in my culture. I received my Blackfeet name, Utsupi Sakumapi, in the hospital, and grew up very involved in culture and, kind of those intersecting identities of also being a gay man have kind of influenced, my continued participation in my own culture. And I've been kind of critical in the last few years of sort of the idea of the effects of colonization in relation to LGBT people in our tribal communities, and have been working. I've done some work around the country with Sovereign Bodies Institute and a few other orgs of kind of, those ideas of, what does it mean to truly decolonize and be in community and be in solidarity. And that was a lot of what my work has focused on, is where does solidarity come from not only from the communities I'm a part of outside of my tribal community, but inside of my tribal community. And how do we welcome people? How do we create this space to have that moment of decolonization, to be aware of the gender diverse and sexuality spectrum of sexuality that tribal communities had pre-colonization. So it's just kind of those aspects that I think influence my own identity, but also the identity of I identify as someone with a disability. I identify as a cis male, and I'm aware of that privilege. So a lot of those other intersecting identities, which kind of fill my worldview, I guess you'd say, as a person.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ivan. And yeah, I appreciate how you tied that into like the line of work and everything, because for me, like I'm just now entering into like the workforce, I guess, and doing so with my hands being held by the federal government as a contracted volunteer right now. But yeah, so for me, like to speak to my like experience a little bit, I grew up in more of an urban area, and my dad, who I get my indigeneity from, and my dad's side of the family, we grew up like going down to the Pine Ridge Reservation and participating in ceremony, and then would come back to our extremely white community off reservation. And it honestly had a lot of lasting repercussions that I feel like I had to unpack a lot, like as a young adult. And coming to university, and I specifically chose MSU because of my ancestors having called the Valley of Flowers home at one point, and that being recognized, and being able to get a scholarship at MSU, and all of that. But really what I think kind of pushed me into the hard work and where I'm at now, doing the things that I am and what I'm passionate about, is how I would go into maybe some more Native and Indigenous focused spaces on campus. And I felt embraced as a like white passing Indigenous person. But then anytime I tried to talk about any LGBTQ, queer, two-spirit related kind of stuff, I didn't really have many folks to talk with about those interests. And I also felt like I had to kind of hide that aspect of my identity. And then, as Paul mentioned in my intro, that I was the vice president of the Queer Straight Alliance at MSU. And even in that space, I often found it very difficult to be Indigenous in a queer space, and vice versa, being queer in an Indigenous space. And so my heart work and that kind of stuff is called to finding and creating space for both the racial identity and the gender and sexuality and that kind of stuff to coincide, where folks don't necessarily have to feel like they choose one aspect of their identity to feel in community with folks. All aspects of us as humans should be embraced and accepted, and the nuances and power structures should be known and at the forefronts of people's minds. So even tying back to like what Ivan said about just the ways in which like colonization has had lasting effects in this arena.
Yes.
And so we wanted to have kind of like ask y'all to do a little bit of seat work here, some silent individual brainstorm. I think we could maybe give like 3 to 5-ish minutes for y'all to think about. Well, one, I want you to think about community, and I want you to define that in whatever way feels best for you. If that's where you currently are geographically, or if maybe there's another community outside of your physical location that you feel called to, and that kind of stuff. But basically, I want you all to try and think about the organizations that meet the needs of the BIPOC community in your area, or whatever place is coming to mind for you. I also want you to try and think about organizations that meet the needs of the LGBTQ plus community. And I also want to call attention to the fact too that based on one's location or upbringing, like it might be very difficult to think about a specific organization or place or a resource. And I just want to normalize that if that's coming up for anyone right now. And then also just try and brainstorm and think if there are any organizations that you know of, whether that's in your immediate community or just out in the world, that you find or know are working with both BIPOC folks and LGBTQ folks. So I'll give you all about till 5:43 Mountain Time. And if anyone feels called to, I know I personally would love to hear some responses, and I think Ivan would as well. So if anyone feels brave enough to come off mute or throw things into the chat, we would greatly appreciate that. Thank you so much, Lori, for throwing your response in. I also agree too that there are so many communities to draw from and to relate back to, and I appreciate that. Sonia, thank you so much for listing out all of these groups too. And I'm definitely familiar with a lot of them. Oh, yes, the Asia student group is an amazing addition to the cultural student groups at MSU. I forget what the letters stand for off the top of my head. So Sonia, if you can remember them and throw them in the chat, I would really appreciate that. But no worries if not. One thing that came to mind for me, just to kind of like share, in my like home community in South Dakota, I definitely thought about like the ACLU of South Dakota, and I believe their indigenous justice organizer coordinator, and like the Black Hills Pride Festival, and then like I know ACLU of South Dakota, like they partner together a lot. There's a lot of overlap. So yeah, there could be a bunch of different organizations and stuff, as someone had already said, a myriad of communities and folks to get involved with. So overlap between one organization meeting the needs of both communities, or other folks coming together and embracing that kind of like solidarity that we talked about earlier. It's amazing. And yes, Asian Student Interracial Association. Thank you, Sonia.
Yeah, I do think it is one. I do think it is one important thing to note, and I think Jericho mentioned it previously. You know, as these groups kind of target themselves to specific identities, you know, again, you know, does that intersection come into play? You know, like I've worked with Western Native Voice. I was used to work at All Nations Health Center, and we're very aware that those organizations were meeting the needs of indigenous folks, but also, you know, I often was very grateful that they often intersected also with the needs of indigenous LGBT people, LGBTQIA people. So, you know, I'm kind of wondering that. And I also think of, you know, if you work for an organization yourself, have they, you know, in the wake of police violence or sort of any other liberation movements in the last few years, have they come out and, you know, released a statement of solidarity? And has that solidarity led to true transformative change? Or was it just kind of an initial kind of message of solidarity? And, you know, where has the solidarity framework been built into the organization?
Yes, calls into question the performative allyship, or being a true ally when the rubber hits the road. Oops. So in terms of involvement, I kind of, I can't remember where I heard it. Whoever put this into my mind was like, we're gonna scrap the gold standard and go straight for platinum. So when Ivan and I were kind of planning some of this, I was like, hey, like I feel like I could talk more to like some of my experiences where things have maybe gone more poorly in terms of involving and engaging with BIPOC and LGBTQ plus folks. But instead of focusing on the negative at the end of my list, I was like, okay, sweet, some positives. So this factors into that platinum standard of when working with folks specifically across racial lines. I personally think even beyond the platinum, like our utopian standard should be to empower, uplift, and center BIPOC voices and perspectives whenever possible. And then I also think going back into intersectionality, also empowering, uplifting, and centering folks who come from backgrounds that have been historically marginalized, disenfranchised, and oppressed, and whether that's further complicated in the sense of, or maybe not complicated, but expanded on, being a Black, trans, low income person at some sort of community forum or on a board. I feel like their voice should be uplifted and empowered and centered, just as kind of like an example. One thing that I think reflects kind of poorly in terms of the work environment is when white supremacist structures and ideologies, like valuing the written word, only believing that there's one way and one style of doing a task or that kind of whatever, can also hinder or kind of just totally turn off some folks' involvement. So if you're going to work with BIPOC, LGBTQ, low income folks and that kind of thing, I strongly suggest that folks reflect on the work environment and kind of what it breeds in terms of success, professionalism, that kind of stuff, and maybe see where areas of improvement can be made. With that, know where your biases fall and know how to unpack them. Seek out further educational opportunities, whether that's professional development, attending trainings and workshops by folks doing the work in terms of racial justice, equity, inclusion, and specifically, again, empower those folks who are most affected by racism, homophobia, transphobia, classism, kind of like X, Y, and Z, elemental P in that regard. And then shut down any behavior that you feel can perpetuate harm or reinforces any sort of negative stereotype before it's too late. I love the saying, like, if it feels like it might be racist, like a statement that's about to come out might be racist, it most likely is. So maybe think a little bit more about maybe some joke you're about to make or that kind of thing. And if you hear something that doesn't sit right with you, trust your gut and follow through with good bystander intervention tactics and seek out the appropriate resources if you feel like a situation is kind of out of your skill set or your grasp to handle in a culturally competent fashion.
And if you feel like your organization or your individual own community building work doesn't answer some of these questions, don't hesitate and reach out to MTREP about our training opportunities and our recent equity and justice and inclusion work that we're doing for organizations.
Yeah, we have an amazing consulting branch that is a new offering of ours. I know I had said I would talk a bit about the solidarity that we at MTREP feel with the Pride Foundation and our org. We thankfully have been involved in 2 cycles of grant funding from the Pride Foundation to do a listening and learning tour that has had to go virtual, where we want to hear the experiences of queer, trans, LGBTQ plus identifying BIPOC youth between the ages of 13 and 25 who currently reside in Montana or call Montana home. And the hope with that is to create some resources, programming, trainings, curriculum, that kind of stuff to disseminate and to also offer to, I remember I was at it was the National Conference on Race and Ethnicity in Higher Ed a couple years ago, and I attended the session and the leader of it said cutie POC for queer, trans, people of color. And now with this project, I can lump in the QTIOC, queer, trans, youth of color. So we want to offer resources and support so that our cuties across the state can not only survive, but thrive in their respective communities. I personally feel like there's a huge urban flight when it comes to LGBTQ plus youth and wanting to leave one's rural environment or hometown for the big city. And I think there are the amazing resources in rural America can oftentimes be overlooked or not necessarily known about. So our hope is to try and combat some of that and to just further expand our programming and offering. So if you or anyone you know fits that kind of description of youth in Montana 13 to 25 that would be willing to share their experience in a confidential fashion to broaden MTREP's reach and scope for the better. My email's down below. Feel free to reach out to both myself and Ivan. We both kind of work on this project together. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note, that this project really came about due to some of those intersecting identities with regards to indigenous youth, suicide prevention, a lot of what Jerico has mentioned, this grew out of that, of understanding, the specific needs of BIPOC LGBT youth.
Yeah. Thanks, Ivan. And I'll just touch on some of the MTREP, or Ivan, do you want to touch on some of the MTREP specific ways to get involved? And I can take the next slide.
Yeah. As I mentioned before, my actual position with MTREP is community engagement lead. So I'm always looking for community partners, community organizations, community volunteers, people who are just really involved in wanting to be able to, one, build community with BIPOC people, but two, are also interested in the forward moving equity and inclusion work that MTREP does. So, reach out to MTREP via our website. We have our info link, volunteer. There will probably be some more volunteering opportunities once it's deemed safe, but there is some possible opportunities for remote work. You can donate to the organization. That's always great. That helps us keep up our work of racial injustice, inclusion, and equity work. You can follow us on social media. And another big one is for our BIPOC people in the audience is the community building group. Solidarity group that we host the last Monday of every month, and more information will be available on social media, but I'm also going to drop my email in the chat. So if you have any other general questions or inquiries, I kind of handle a lot of the inquiries and info when we get the info emails, so I can drop that in the chat.
Yeah, and I just wanted to kind of highlight a couple additional resources across the state. And for those of you that might be outside of Montana, I know some folks who are affiliated or work with these groups and would be more than welcome to kind of brainstorm and that kind of stuff with y'all. There's the Montana Two-Spirit Society, Gender Equality Montana, Montana Gender Alliance. We have the Montana Pride Foundation, kind of localized, I forget what the word I guess is for that. Anyways, tons of student groups, both at the collegiate level, and then I know of a bunch at the high schools and that kind of stuff. There's local PFLAG organizations, which is a bit more like parent focused. I believe that kind of the high schools seem to operate more with a kind of gay straight alliance, and then with my experience at the collegiate level is the queer straight alliance, so just a little bit different language around that. Amazing drag in the state. I believe it's the Imperial Sovereign Court Township of the state of Montana. The Trishas are a local Bozeman kind of group of queens. AIDS outreach, the Trevor Project being kind of more outside of the state of Montana. And then on the Bridger Care website, you can find a list of LGBTQ plus and allied providers in Gallatin Valley.
A big one I can't believe I forgot to include, your local urban Indian health clinics, or for more rural areas, a lot of the IHS, the Indian Health Service hospitals, can offer support, resources, sort of any of those general inquiries with regards to, say, if you're working in a group that needs something related to indigenous folks or care. Those are always great resources, particularly All Nations in Missoula.
Thank you for that info, Ivan. And I believe we're we're near the end of our time here. But as you can see, there's Ivan's email, my email address, and then the info@mtrep email address. So I just kind of want to open up some space for any potential questions, or maybe in the sake of time, I'm sure some folks have other things to take care of. Feel free to reach out to us as well. We would be more than happy to chat with y'all outside of this, or yeah.
And we have plenty of time since we don't have another session coming, so no need to end anytime soon.
Okay, cool. So yeah, if any of y'all have questions, feel free. I might stop sharing my screen if that's okay. Oops. Sorry, I paused the recording. I hope I didn't.
Yeah, no. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Sonia. Thank you, Tim, for attending.
Yeah, thanks, y'all. It's so great to see some familiar faces. Oh, yeah, Sonia. You'll have to tell me what prize you got.
Lots of accolades in the chat for you both. And I just want to say what a great resource we have here in the States with you working on this, with all of you working on these issues. Thanks for the great information you provided us today, and appreciate the you allowing us to record this, and we'll certainly be posting this for everyone to enjoy and experience as well. If there's nothing else, no other questions or parting words?
Oh yeah, thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks again. This is year 2, so maybe we'll be back for year 3 next year with some more fine days. So
that's great. Yeah, well, thanks so much. Well, we'll plan to start again in the morning at 9:30. We've got our get to know you breakfast, and then we'll be starting with sessions starting at 10 o'clock our time. Until then, thanks again for joining us.